tied up, he would never, ever, ever realize his true potential. I won't be before you too long. Jesus said, I want a colt, and I want you to untie that colt. No, I don't want a donkey. I want a colt. There's a difference. There's a difference this evening because I found out that donkeys are stubborn. Donkeys are noisy. He hauling all the time, and donkeys like to be in a crowd. But if you get a colt, I can change the life and the perspective of that colt. See, nobody thought, even the disciples didn't realize that that colt had much worth. But Jesus said he's worth something. He says, untie the colt. A colt will be found where two roads meet. Anybody here ever been tied up at the crossroads of life? A colt was found tied up with restricted movement. The colt was tied up. Somebody say tied up.
Tied up.
In other words, the colt could not go anywhere. Kept in the same place, in the same spot, looking at the same folk and the same people. Simply because he was tied up. How was he tied up? He was tied up by his taskmaster. Anytime you have been tied up by the taskmaster, you have a limited viewpoint. Oh, the colt couldn't see behind him, and he couldn't see above him. All the colt could see was what the taskmaster wanted him to see. But Jesus said, untie the colt. Jesus said the taskmaster wanted that colt to remain in that same spot, in that same place, doing the same thing day after day for somebody else's pleasure. Oh, but can I get off that colt for just a little while and talk about folk for a little while? Don't you realize that there are some folk truly want to keep you tied up? Some brothers and some sisters don't want you and I to know our full potential. They want you in the same place, in the same spot, and doing the same thing. And you better not move. I wish I could preach this. You better stay right here. And I dare you to move. Some folk don't want you to recognize your full potential. You can't do nothing tied up. Somebody say, untie me.
Untie me.
Tied up folk believe everything they hear. Tied up folk live a life of I can't. Tied up folk live a life of I woulda, coulda, shoulda type of life. If you're tied up, we need not to remember and forget that you and I one day was tied up. Just domesticated so long that we put limits on God. Many don't believe what God can do. How many of you realize that God can do some amazing things? Is there anybody here that was once tied up? And now you're untied and you're free? Free to live and free to worship? Realizing that if it wasn't for God, as you look back over your life and you think things over, you can truly say that I've got a testimony. I'm no longer domesticated, but I am liberated.
Thank you, Lord.
When folks who were once tied up and get untied, they are not ashamed to tell the story. They'll communicate that story with anybody that's willing to listen about how one day that God set you free. Oh, if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, where would you and I be? The disciples were told to get a colt. And if the owner asked, why are you taking my colt? Tell him simply that the Lord has need of him. Well, here I stand tonight telling you that the Lord has need of you. I wish somebody said that. As that colt came in, they put blankets on that colt and placed Jesus on that colt. The colt then moves into a new location and a new situation, seeing folk that he's never seen before and going places that he's never been and coming in contact with some wonderful people. We must be like that colt tonight and take the emphasis off of ourselves and put the emphasis on Jesus. We ought to see Jesus first. Whatever you do, we ought to see Jesus first. Whatever we say, we ought to see Jesus first. The colt is bringing Jesus into Jerusalem. In my mind, I can imagine that colt saying, they're not clapping and praising for me. They're praising Jesus. I'm praising him too because just a few hours ago I was tired of him. But not anymore. Guess what? I've got Jesus riding with me. Simply because he untied me. And since Jesus has untied me, now I know my true purpose. You ought to get excited about that tonight, because every now and then when you realize just how liberated you are and just how free that you are. So here in my closing, my brothers and my sisters tonight, I invite you to untie your worship, and untie your praise, untie your love, untie your understanding, untie your giving. Somebody say simply, untie.
Untie me.